It's the final day of the first meeting of the G20 under South Africa's presidency, and decision makers and central bank governors from the bloc are expected to thresh out some economic issues. Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago will lead the discussion today with the keynote address, which is expected to touch on whether the response by the central banks globally has been adequate to stave off runaway inflation. Our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, is joining us for that conversation. And that has been a stickling point, right? Xolani, very good morning to you. The high interest rates being hard, particularly on the middle class in South Africa. And how will the G20 meeting shape that particular conversation?
Good morning, Aldrin. Indeed, that is quite an important one for Lesetja Kganyago this morning, as he will be delivering the opening remarks to the other deputy central bank governors and central bank governors from the G20 countries. Of course, we've got the IMF leadership, the World Bank leadership, OECD also here, from a range of other important organizations thrashing out exactly some of the things that they will be talking about is how the responses, the different responses from all the central banks around the world have been, because in terms of in high inflation that we've seen in the past 2 years, precipitated by things such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the war between Russia and Ukraine, and now the Middle East conflict, have actually led to high inflation, and that leading to central banks having to respond with policy decisions and increasing interest rates. Now that globally inflation is easing, the question is for central banks such as that in South Africa, have they done enough? We've seen a 25 basis point cut in the past 3 months. Twice they have done that. But when you look at the developed markets, some of them did 50 basis point cuts. There has been criticism on the Reserve Bank in South Africa to say they should be doing more actually to cut interest rates because they've hit hard on the middle class in South Africa. Those who are highly indebted, whether through credit cards, whether through car loans, whether through home loans, those are the people who are struggling with high levels of debt. The big question is, have central banks like the one in South Africa done enough to cushion the blow for those who are highly indebted? And we're going to hear from the central bank governor, who has received a lot of support in terms of how they've responded to high inflation with high interest rates, because they are trying to protect the buying power of the currency. But a lot is going to come through in terms of the economy and many other policy decisions that they will be looking at as central bank governors.
Yeah, also lots of meetings within meetings taking place, considering that you had the ambassadors meeting, the deputy finance ministers as well, and that address by the United Nations Security Secretary General Antonio Guterres. What happens after these meetings?
Aldrin, this being the first meeting under the South African presidency, the next meeting is going to be early next year, where there will be ministers who have to take the decisions and recommendations from this 4-day gathering forward and come up with a declaration and understanding to say, as ministers from the G20 countries, this is what we have agreed upon on these issues. This is what we are going to push at international level and at regional level in our own countries. But it's not always the case that there is consensus. We saw in Indonesia that there was no consensus declaration by ministers in the finance tract. And that doesn't happen often, but it does happen when there are divergent views. Ministers do not agree on many different matters. matters, and it ends up being a futile exercise. Hopefully, that is not going to be the case with South Africa's presidency, as we heard from Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, giving the marching orders really on what they expect from South Africa as they have the presidency of the G20, because you can really, if you have the presidency of the G20, shape the discourse globally. And actually what we've seen is South Africa doing that, not only for the country Mzansi, but for the whole continent when it comes to the African Union's Agenda 2063. So a lot of things, meetings are still going to take place. Declarations on consensus have to be issued. We might get some consensus on a number of issues that have been discussed over the past couple of days, because the mood has been one of quite acceptance but robust engagements as well behind closed doors.
Thank you so much, Xolani Mbanjwa. They're joining us from Sandton, where there is that meeting that is taking place, and the meeting concluding a bit later on today.